So I know you guys are super keen on some new tutorials and some new drawing videos. Unfortunately, I have recently injured my hand and my wrist, and so I'm just getting it looked at and having a bit of a rest and recovery period. I've been working super hard on some secret projects that I think you guys are going to really love, and so I'm just going to go through in today's video and answer some questions that you guys have asked recently in the comments. Now, I just want to start by saying that some questions are better to be answered in tutorial format where I go through each and every step in detail. That way you guys get a really solid look and understanding of what the question was. And some questions are a little bit better answered in this type of format where I can throw on a video. In this case, I'm painting a snake and Hoju design that was recently posted to my Instagram. Link in the comments if you want to see that one. But I'm going to be answering the questions in this video that are more suited to this type of content. However, if I haven't answered your questions, more than likely I have put it in the back of my head or in my planner for some future video ideas. Okay, so the first question is one that I get all the time. It's about the supplies and materials that I use, basically wanting to know what I use to paint my designs. So I've got this question from C3K4 asking, "Hi Daggett, I'd like to know what tools you use to draw, paint, brushes, paper. I recently bought a scratchbook, I think he means sketchbook, and the brush pen is blurry. Do you have any advice for a beginner on what is the best way to start?" Now, I'm also going to link this with Kyle Adams' question here. He asked, "What paper are you using in this video?" Now, like I said, these are really commonly asked questions that I get in almost all of the videos that I do. Just asking me what supplies I use, and it's a reasonable question, especially if you are new to the game. Now, I recently did a video explaining all of the supplies and materials that I commonly use in my artwork. I will leave a link in the description to that video, as well as a link to a page on my website that allows you to have a look at all of the various tools and supplies that I use. It really comes across maybe as though I have all these secret supplies and tools. It's not like that at all. They're all fairly basic tools, and all I've done is over the years I've experimented with many different mediums, from alcohol markers from Copic through to acrylic paints. I've played around with watercolor paints, and I've just found somewhere that suits me. I've settled on acrylic inks for my colors and my shading, and I'm using, I don't really use any specific brand for my line work. I really like to use Staedtler fine liners. I also really like to use Tiki fine liners. So it depends on what you like. There's a lot of different variations in brand, and a lot of it comes down to personal preference. Like I said, to answer that one, I have left a link in the description to that page on my website, as well as the video going through all of my supplies. Now, before we get on to the second question, I just want to point out that I did leave individual replies to both of those comments. I do try my best to reply to every single comment that's left on my channel. So if you do have a question, don't be afraid to ask. Just leave one in the comments, or feel free to message me over on Instagram or Facebook at Daggett Designs, and I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. Okay, so this next question comes in from Florida Family Outdoors, asking me about feathering technique and having a little bit of trouble getting smooth gradients, and if I have any advice on that. Now, supplies aside, because like I said, I've already talked a lot about what supplies I use. I think if you're using the same supplies and you're having trouble with your feathering, the only real advice I can give is that you're either not putting enough ink on the page, or you're not using enough moisture in your brush. It's going to be one or the other, or maybe a tweaking of a combination of both of them. But essentially, you need to have enough moisture in your brush to draw the ink out into a feather. So it needs to be drawn out from where it is and essentially create a gradation from where it is to the white of the page. So if you don't have enough moisture in your brush, it's not going to pick up the ink from the page and draw it out softly, or pick up the pigment, I should say. And if you don't put enough ink down, it dries very quickly and you no longer have any time to work with it. And unfortunately, if you do work with acrylic inks the way that I do, they dry very, very quickly, and they dry waterproof, which means you cannot reactivate them the same way that you do with watercolors or gouache. So when you draw them out into a feather or into a gradation, you kind of need to make sure that it's not completely dried and that there is a little bit of moisture still in the pigment as well as on your brush. Now, if you put too much ink, it will oversaturate the area, and when you go to feather it out smoothly, it's just going to pull huge amounts of pigment across, and it's going to make a massive mess. If you don't put enough ink, it's going to do the opposite, and you're not going to get any feathering. It's just going to be a really solid edge with like a smudge of gray next to it. So yeah, the best way to counter this is to make sure you have enough moisture in the brush as well as enough moisture in the page. I can't really give you much more information. It takes a lot of practice. Maybe if you're still struggling with this, and if there's others that are still struggling with this, leave me a comment and I'll consider doing a dedicated video to it. But I think with a little bit more practice and with a little bit more patience, you'll definitely get it. Now, the next couple of questions come from Pablo. He's asking a few different things. I'm going to answer them individually. The first one is regarding wet on wet or wet on dry technique for painting. And essentially, I always work wet on dry with my painting style. I never really work wet on wet unless it's to achieve a very specific look. The reason for this is that wet on dry painting gives you a lot more control and precision in your color and even in your shading as well. And I just find it easier to lay everything down on dry and then add moisture to it to create my blends. It's very rare that you'll see me use wet on wet techniques. It's certainly not the wrong way to go. I know that some people do it to great success, but it's not the way that I paint. I tend to do wet on dry. So the next question I got was in regards to line weight and line value, like how to use different sizes and when it's appropriate to use them. The first thing I will say with the line weight thing is that it is a bit of a style preference. There are certain styles that use a lot of variation in line weight to add expression to the designs. But for the type of work that I do, I typically use line weight to literally manage the weight of the various elements of an image. So line weight to me refers to the visual perceived weight of a line based on its mass. So if a line is thicker and larger, it looks heavier visually, if that makes any sense. So when I do something such as clothing on a character, and I want that clothing to be old school and kind of baggy, then I'm going to make that clothing have a thicker line weight to it. So this way it creates that sort of heavy texture, whereas the skin of the person or the character is going to have a standard line weight that I would have used throughout the rest of the design. So I use those heavier line weights to accentuate when something needs to be heavier or have a little bit more emphasis. Another great way that you can use this to your advantage is to do your foreground subject matter with slightly heavier line weight than your background. This way your background tends to automatically, you've created contrast between your foreground and background, and your background tends to recede a little bit and not look so full on. And the last question here was about tonal value. Now, I'm not 100% sure what this question was referring to, but essentially tonal value just refers to how light or dark your color or your gray values are, your scale of values are. So this is what a value scale looks like. And so you can see it's essentially how light or dark something is. Now, I guess the question maybe is asking a little bit on how I use tonal values through my designs maybe. It's a bit of a tough one to answer. I think most of my colors stay within the same sort of range of tonal value, which can make things look a little bit flat, but I like my images to look really bold and bright in the sense that they're very vibrant in their colors. So a lot of the colors are going to be in their true vibrancy, as opposed to adding a lot of variation in the tones of my color. But I still create this tonal variation through my black shading. And this is where it's so important with tattoo designs to have your black shading in there. And why I think black shading is really important is because it creates more contrast and it makes images look less flat. So this is something that you'll see really common with a lot of old school designs, is adding a lot of black to the images is going to help add contrast to the design and make things stand out a little bit more and pop a little bit more for that specific style, especially because the color style for that is going to be so flat. So I hope I answered your questions, Pablo, and that's it. So I've recently been posting a couple of sneak peek images of a special project that I'm working on at the moment for you guys that I'm super pumped for. I'm very, very excited for this, and I really hope once I announce this, you guys are going to be just as excited as me. And I've received a handful of comments on these posts asking if it's a book, you know, what the general sort of details of the book are going to be and whatnot. And yes, I can confirm for you guys that I have been writing a book. It is nearly finished. I'm just putting in the sort of final parts of the process. and I can't tell you everything about it just yet. I want to sort of keep things under wrap until I do a big launch, but you guys will be the first to know about it. So if you are subscribed to my channel and you do see the community posts from my channel, you will be the first to be notified. If you're not yet subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out when I launch my book. That having been said, guys, that is all I've got for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope I answered some of your questions. If you have any new ones, leave them in the comments section down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. All right, bye-bye.